An arrogant UFC champion humiliates an elderly man at a Beverly Hills charity gala, calling him a washed-up movie star and challenging him to a fight. The cocky fighter laughs as he towers over the quiet gentleman, threatening to knock out this grandpa in front of horrified dinner guests. Security cameras capture every second as the bully flexes his muscles and demands the old man prove himself worthy of sharing the same room. But what this steroid-pumped destroyer doesn't realize is that the humble stranger he's taunting is none other than Donnie Yen, the living legend who's been perfecting lethal martial arts for over 40 years. The champion has no idea he just challenged a man who can break bones with pressure points and move faster than his roided-up reflexes can even register. While the fighter poses for phone cameras, thinking he's found easy prey, the martial arts master quietly accepts his challenge. With a calm nod that chills everyone watching. The UFC bully believes his knockout power and cage experience make him unstoppable, but he's about to learn why movie magic was never magic at all. What happens when modern arrogance meets ancient wisdom? Can raw muscle survive against perfected technique? What happened next would shatter the champion's world forever. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus, the Destroyer, Kane's eyes snapped open at exactly 6 a.m., his internal clock as precise as his knockout timing. The first thing he did, before stretching his sculpted 245-pound frame, before his morning protein shake, before even checking the time, was grab his phone from the nightstand of his $2 million Las Vegas penthouse. 12.8 million Instagram followers. Up 50,000 overnight. The dopamine hit was immediate and familiar. Marcus scrolled through the comments on his latest training video. GOAT. Destroy everyone. Unbeatable machine. Each praise fed the hunger that no amount of championship belts could satisfy. He rolled out of his king-sized bed, catching his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the strip. 6'3" of chiseled perfection stared back. Every muscle earned through punishing dedication and chemical enhancement he'd never admit to using. The eagle tattoo across his back seemed to spread its wings as he flexed, while Destroyer, in Gothic letters, blazed across his forearms. 20 minutes later, Marcus roared into the parking lot of Kane Combat Academy in his chrome Lamborghini, the engine's growl announcing his arrival to anyone within 3 blocks. His state-of-the-art facility sprawled across 15,000 square feet of premium real estate. Every piece of equipment top tier, every surface gleaming under professional lighting. Rigs that documented his every move. "Morning, champ," Danny Rossetti called out. But Marcus was already in motion, warming up with shadow boxing that would have intimidated heavyweight contenders. His first sparring partner, a promising light heavyweight named Tommy, stepped into the ring with obvious reluctance. The beating that followed wasn't training, it was domination theater. Marcus unleashed combinations that sent Tommy sprawling, then berated him for not bringing energy. When Tommy tried to clinch defensively, Marcus shoved him into the ropes with unnecessary force. "You're making me look bad on camera," Marcus snarled, pointing at the documentary crew filming from ringside. "Fight back or get out." His second sparring partner lasted 4 minutes before a borderline illegal elbow opened a cut above his eye. The third quit after Marcus deliberately targeted his previously injured ribs, ignoring the man's obvious pain. "That's how you separate the fighters from the pretenders," Marcus announced to the cameras, not even breathing hard despite 20 minutes of violence. Everyone wants to be champion until they face a real destroyer. He fired his nutritionist during lunch for questioning his supplement regimen, dismissing her concerns about dangerous combinations with a wave of his hand. "I pay you to make me stronger, not to lecture me like my mother." The afternoon brought a magazine photo shoot where Marcus posed with his championship belts, each shot designed to showcase his physical dominance. Between takes, he scrolled through social media, watching his engagement numbers climb with each behind-the-scenes post. Jerry Polk arrived as the sun was setting, carrying an embossed invitation that made Marcus's eyes light up with predatory interest. "Beverly Hills charity gala tomorrow night," Jerry explained. "Children's hospital fundraiser. Lots of wealthy donors, entertainment industry people. Good for your image." Marcus examined the invitation, already calculating the networking opportunities. "Perfect," Nothing like showing these Hollywood types what a real champion looks like. As he climbed into his Lamborghini, Marcus was already planning his entrance, his outfit, his conversation strategies. Tomorrow night would be another stage for his performance, another audience to conquer. He had no idea he was driving toward the encounter that would destroy everything he thought he knew about himself. The Beverly Hills Hilton's ballroom glittered. Like a jewel box, crystal chandeliers casting warm light over Hollywood's elite gathering for the annual Children's Hospital Foundation Gala. Paparazzi flashbulbs erupted as Marcus Kane's chrome Lamborghini pulled up to the valet stand, the car's aggressive lines drawing appreciative murmurs from the crowd. Marcus emerged wearing a $5,000 midnight blue tuxedo that had been tailored to showcase his imposing physique. He moved with the calculated swagger of a man accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room, his blue eyes scanning the gathering with predatory assessment. "Marcus, over here," photographers shouted, and he obliged with practiced poses, flexing subtly within the confines of his formal wear. The attention was intoxicating, feeding the constant hunger for validation that drove him harder than any opponent ever could. Inside the ballroom, pharmaceutical heiress Victoria Sterling was explaining her latest acquisition to tech billionaire Bradley Morrison when Marcus inserted himself into their conversation with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. "Mind if I join you?" he asked without waiting for an answer, his massive frame creating an intimidating presence. "Marcus Kane, UFC heavyweight champion. You might have seen me destroy Rodriguez last month." Victoria's polite smile tightened, almost imperceptibly, but Marcus was already dominating the conversation, regaling them with detailed accounts of his victories, his training regimen, his upcoming title defense. He name-dropped his celebrity friends, his endorsement deals, his social media following, turning every topic back to himself with the relentless self-absorption of a man who genuinely believed he was the center of the universe. The key to knockout power, Marcus explained while demonstrating shadow boxing combinations that made other guests step back nervously, is understanding that some people are born to dominate and others are born to submit. "I've never met anyone who could stand up to real violence." As he worked the room like a political candidate, pressing flesh with pharmaceutical executives and entertainment moguls, Marcus noticed the subtle patterns of wealth and influence. He could read power dynamics, identify the decision-makers, spot the gatekeepers who could elevate his brand to new heights. But there was one figure he couldn't categorize, an older Asian man in a simple black suit who sat alone at a corner table, seemingly content to observe the spectacle around him. The man appeared to be in his 60s, slight of build, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing but judged gently. He occasionally made quiet bids during the charity auction, winning several items including a vintage Bruce Lee photograph, but his demeanor suggested genuine interest in the cause rather than competitive display. Marcus found the man's presence irritating in a way he couldn't quite articulate. In Marcus's experience, people either sought his attention or avoided him out of intimidation. This stranger did neither. He simply existed in his own space with a centered calm that seemed to mock Marcus's constant performance. During the cocktail hour, Marcus positioned himself near the mystery man's table, hoping to overhear conversations that might reveal his identity or status. The man spoke occasionally with other guests who approached him, always listening more than talking, always showing respect for their perspectives even when they were clearly seeking his approval. The charity auction provided another stage for Marcus to display his wealth and status. He bid aggressively on luxury items, a week in Aspen, courtside Lakers tickets, a private wine tasting in Napa Valley, not because he wanted them, but because the bidding wars allowed him to demonstrate his financial power in front of the room's elite. Each winning bid earned him nods of acknowledgement from fellow guests, feeding his ego while building his reputation as someone who belonged in their rarefied circles. But even as he accumulated status symbols, Marcus found his attention drawn back to the quiet man in the corner, whose modest bids and genuine appreciation for each item suggested a completely different relationship with wealth and influence. The evening progressed. Marcus's confidence soared. He was conquering this room just as he conquered opponents in the octagon, establishing dominance through superior force and relentless aggression. He had no idea that his next conversation would expose him as a fraud in front of everyone who mattered. The dinner break provided Marcus with the opening he'd been waiting for. He spotted tech entrepreneur Bradley Morrison engaged in quiet conversation with the mysterious older gentleman, and Marcus saw his opportunity to finally solve the puzzle that had been nagging at him all evening. "Hope you don't mind if I join you," Marcus announced, pulling out a chair without waiting for permission. His massive frame dominated the intimate table setting as he inserted himself between the two men with characteristic disregard for social boundaries. Bradley Morrison shifted uncomfortably, clearly recognizing the intrusion but too polite to object directly. The older gentleman simply nodded graciously, his calm demeanor unchanged by Marcus's aggressive presence. "Marcus Kane," he announced, extending a hand toward the stranger while fixing Bradley with an expectant stare. "UFC heavyweight champion. I don't think we've been introduced to your friend here." Bradley cleared his throat nervously. "Marcus, I'd like you to meet." "Actually," Marcus interrupted, 3 champagnes having dissolved what little filter he possessed. "Let me guess. Another tech guy? Movie producer? Real estate mogul?" He studied the older man's simple attire and unassuming presence with growing amusement. "Wait, I got it. You're one of those martial arts guys from the movies, right? That's cute." The older gentleman continued eating his dinner with practiced dignity, showing no reaction to Marcus's obvious disrespect. His silence only encouraged Marcus to escalate his performance for the invisible audience he imagined was watching. "See, this is what I love about these Hollywood events," Marcus continued, his voice growing louder as the alcohol emboldened him. "Everyone's pretending to be tough, but when you put them next to a real fighter, the difference is obvious." He flexed within his tuxedo, the fabric straining against his chemically enhanced musculature. Bradley Morrison's face had gone pale, recognizing the brewing disaster but powerless to stop it. Other nearby tables had begun to notice the commotion, with several guests discreetly recording the scene on their phones. "You know what the problem is with movie fighting?" Marcus asked rhetorically, launching into shadow boxing demonstrations that made other diners flinch. "It's all dancing around, pretty moves for cameras. This is what real fighting looks like." He threw a series of powerful combinations into the air, his movements aggressive and intimidating despite their lack of target. The older man set down his fork and looked directly at Marcus for the first time, his intelligent eyes carrying decades of experience that Marcus was too intoxicated and self-absorbed to recognize. When he spoke, his voice was soft but carried easily across the growing circle of attention. "I apologize if my presence has somehow offended you," he said with genuine politeness that made Marcus's aggression appear even more childish by contrast. "Offended?" Marcus laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "Grandpa, you couldn't offend me if you tried. But I tell you what, since you used to pretend to fight for cameras, maybe you'd like to see what real combat looks like. I could give you a free lesson." The suggestion hung in the air like a toxic cloud, drawing horrified stares from nearby tables. Bradley Morrison looked ready to disappear into the floor, while servers paused their duties to witness the spectacle of a professional fighter publicly bullying an elderly man. Marcus leaned back in his chair, supremely satisfied with his performance, already imagining how the social media clips would showcase his dominance over Hollywood pretenders. The champagne had convinced him he was being charming, provocative, memorable. Exactly the kind of alpha behavior that built legends. That he remained completely oblivious to the fact that he had just challenged a living legend to a fight in front of dozens of witnesses with cameras. The older gentleman's expression remained patient, almost paternal, as if he were watching a child throw a tantrum that would eventually exhaust itself. The older gentleman carefully set down his napkin and extended his hand across the table with formal precision. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to respect. "I'm Donnie Yen." Marcus accepted the handshake with his typical bone-crushing grip, genuinely processing the name. For the first time, his alcohol-fogged brain searched for recognition, but found nothing. The pause stretched awkwardly as nearby diners held their breath, waiting for his response. "Donnie Yen," Marcus repeated slowly, his expression shifting from aggressive confidence to confused dismissal. "Never heard of you, old man." He laughed loudly enough to draw stares from across the ballroom. the sound carrying a sharp edge of mockery that made several guests visibly cringe. But hey, Marcus continued, his voice growing louder as he sensed an audience gathering. I bet you were pretty good back in the day, right? Before your knees gave out and your reflexes went to hell. Donnie mentioned several of his films with modest pride. Ip Man, Rogue One, the John Wick franchise. But Marcus waved each reference away with increasing dismissiveness, his champagne-fueled arrogance reaching new heights. Oh, Star Wars. Marcus exclaimed with theatrical recognition. Yeah, I saw that one. You were the blind guy who got killed, right? Churret or whatever. He mimicked what he imagined were martial arts moves, flailing his arms in crude approximation of traditional forms while fellow diners watched in growing horror. The phones were out now, at least a dozen guests discreetly recording the spectacle of a professional fighter publicly humiliating an elderly man at a charity event. Marcus remained oblivious to the documentation, convinced he was delivering entertainment that would enhance his reputation. Tell you what, Grandpa, Marcus announced, standing up to his full intimidating height and looking down at the seated legend. Since you used to play pretend fighter for movies, I'll give you a free lesson in what real violence looks like. Consider it charity work. Seems appropriate for tonight's theme. He gestured broadly at the elegant ballroom around them, his movements exaggerated and aggressive. We could do it right here, right now. I promise to go easy on you. Maybe just a light tap to put you down, nothing that would require an ambulance. The suggestion sent ripples of shock through the nearby tables. Several guests began reaching for their phones to call security, while others leaned forward in horrified fascination at the unprecedented breach of civilized behavior. Bradley Morrison finally found his voice, stammering out a desperate attempt at intervention. Marcus, perhaps we should stay out of this, Bradley. Marcus cut him off with casual brutality. This is between me and the movie star here. I'm just offering some friendly education about the difference between choreography and combat. Donnie remained seated throughout the verbal assault, his expression shifting subtly from patient tolerance to something approaching disappointment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried quiet dignity that made Marcus's bombast appear even more juvenile. That's very generous of you. Donnie replied with genuine politeness that somehow made his restraint more impressive than any aggressive response could have been. However, I think I'll finish my dinner first. Marcus interpreted the polite deflection as cowardice, his grin becoming predatory as he sensed what he perceived as weakness. Smart choice, old man. Probably best to keep those arthritic bones safe in their chair. He patted Donnie's shoulder with condescending familiarity before strutting back toward his own table, already planning the social media posts that would immortalize his dominance over another Hollywood pretender. Behind him, Donnie returned calmly to his meal. But several guests noticed the slight tightening around his eyes, the only visible sign that Marcus Kane had just made the most catastrophic mistake of his professional life. Marcus woke to the insistent buzzing of his phone, the sound cutting through his champagne-induced fog like a fire alarm. Rolling over in his king-sized bed, he squinted at the screen. 47 missed calls, 312 text messages, and notification icons covering every app. His Instagram had exploded overnight. The charity gala video, grainy phone footage of him towering over the seated older man, had already hit 2.3 million views. Hashtag Donnie Yen disrespect was trending worldwide, accompanied by hashtag UFC bully and hashtag respect your elders. Initially, Marcus felt the familiar rush of viral attention. Controversy meant engagement. Engagement meant visibility. Visibility meant money. He scrolled through the comments with growing satisfaction until the content began registering in his alcohol-cleared brain. This idiot just disrespected a legend. Donnie Yen would destroy this roided-up wannabe. Someone teach this punk some respect. How do you not know who Ip Man is? The comments weren't praising his alpha dominance. They were calling him ignorant. Worse, they were sharing video compilations of this Donnie Yen character performing impossible feats of speed and precision that made Marcus's heavy bag workouts look clumsy by comparison. His phone rang. Regina Fairchild, his publicist, sounded like she was hyperventilating. Marcus, what the hell were you thinking? She shrieked without preamble. Do you have any idea who you just humiliated on camera? Some old movie star, Marcus replied, but Uncertainty was creeping into his voice as he watched a video of Donnie moving faster than his eyes could track. Donnie Yen is a martial arts icon with 400 million followers across Asia. You just insulted the man who taught the world about Wing Chun, who worked with Jackie Chan, who's been in Star Wars and Marvel movies. Marcus's confidence wavered as the magnitude of his ignorance became clear. But admitting mistake was foreign to his nature, especially with cameras potentially rolling at any moment. "So what?" he shot back, his voice rising defensively. "I don't care if he's Bruce Lee's ghost. I fight for real, not for cameras. Old movies don't mean anything in a real fight." Instead of damage control, Marcus doubled down. He posted a video response from his penthouse gym, flexing between sets while addressing the camera with characteristic arrogance. "All these keyboard warriors getting upset about some old movie star," he announced to his phone camera. "I've never heard of this Donnie Yen guy, and after seeing his little dance moves online, I'm not impressed. You want to know the difference between movie fighting and real fighting? Step into the octagon with me." He pointed directly at the camera lens, his expression hardening with challenge. "Anytime you want to settle this, Grandpa, Vegas, New York, hell, your backyard, I'll knock you out cold. Let's see how those pretty forms work against someone who actually knows how to break bones." The video went live immediately, and Marcus watched with satisfaction as views climbed rapidly. Let the internet cry about disrespect. Controversy was currency in the attention economy. His phone immediately exploded with notifications as the challenge video spread across platforms like wildfire. Marcus grinned, already imagining the pay-per-view numbers if this ancient movie star was foolish enough to actually accept. He had no idea that thousands of miles away, a legend was quietly considering teaching him a lesson he would never forget. Point 3. Days of global controversy had transformed Marcus's life into a media circus. Every major sports network wanted interviews. Sponsors were flooding Jerry Polk with nervous calls, and Marcus's social media following had jumped by 2 million. Half supporters, half people hoping to watch him get destroyed. Marcus was holding court at his training facility, basking in the attention while delivering sound bites to assembled reporters, when Jerry burst through the doors with his phone pressed to his ear and panic written across his face. "He what?" Jerry's voice cracked as he listened to the caller. The color drained from his weathered features while Marcus continued demonstrating punching combinations for ESPN cameras, oblivious to the brewing storm. Jerry ended the call and stood frozen, staring at his phone like it contained a bomb threat. The assembled media sensed breaking news and immediately redirected their cameras toward him. "Jerry," Marcus called out, irritation creeping into his voice. "What's got you looking like someone died?" "He accepted," Jerry whispered, then cleared his throat and repeated louder. "Donnie Yen accepted your challenge." The training facility fell silent except for the hum of overhead lights. Even the documentary crew stopped rolling, sensing they were witnessing a watershed moment. Marcus felt his stomach drop before his ego reasserted control. "Accepted what exactly?" Marcus asked, trying to maintain his confident facade while his mind raced through the implications. Jerry read from his phone screen with the mechanical precision of someone delivering a death sentence. Through his representative, Master Donnie Yen formally accepts Marcus Kane's challenge to an exhibition match. Proposed venue: MGM Grand Garden Arena, Las Vegas. All proceeds to be donated to children's hospitals worldwide, as befitting the original charity event where this began. The reporters erupted into a feeding frenzy of questions, but Marcus barely heard them. His initial panic lasted exactly 3 seconds before being overwhelmed by the intoxicating vision of massive financial opportunity. This wasn't just a fight, this was the biggest payday of his career. Finally, Marcus shouted, throwing his arms wide to embrace the cameras. Someone with actual backbone. I was starting to think Hollywood was full of nothing but lawyers and cowards. He launched into impromptu press conference mode, his natural showmanship overriding any lingering doubts. I respect that he's not hiding behind publicists and legal teams like most of these fake tough guys. Takes guts for a senior citizen to step up against a real destroyer. The assembled media ate it up, scribbling notes and adjusting camera angles to capture Marcus's theatrical confidence. But Jerry noticed the slight tremor in his fighter's hands, the way his eyes kept darting toward his phone to check social media reactions. Within an hour, MGM Grand's events coordinator was calling Jerry directly. Preliminary ticket inquiries are already at 15,000, she reported with barely contained excitement. We could fill the Grand Garden Arena 3 times over. The international interest is unlike anything we've seen. Marcus overheard the conversation and felt his grin stretching painfully wide. Set the date, he announced to the room full of cameras and reporters. 1 month from now. Give the old man time to get his affairs in order and update his will. The quote would play on every sports network within hours, cementing Marcus's image as either supremely confident or completely delusional. Behind his bravado, a small voice wondered what he'd gotten himself into. But the voice was quickly drowned out by visions of pay-per-view millions and global fame. AS reporters filed out to break the story worldwide. Marcus caught his reflection in the gym's mirrors. The face staring back looked confident, powerful, unstoppable. He had no idea he was looking at a man who had just signed up for his own destruction. The official fight announcement triggered a media explosion that dwarfed anything Marcus had experienced. Within hours, #Yen vs. Kane was trending in 12 countries, and Marcus found himself at the center of a cultural phenomenon that transcended sports into entertainment. Tradition versus modernity, East versus West. Marcus threw himself into preparation. With the obsessive intensity that had built his career, but for the first time, doubt gnawed at the edges of his confidence. He'd hired 3 additional sparring partners, installed new high-definition cameras to document every training session, and increased his steroid dosage to levels that would have terrified a more cautious athlete, his typical routine amplified into something approaching desperation. Heavier weights until his joints screamed, more aggressive sparring until partners regularly required medical attention, cardio sessions that pushed his chemically enhanced heart to dangerous limits. Every workout was filmed for the documentary crew creating his Road to Destruction series. This is what peak human performance looks like, Marcus announced to the cameras while deadlifting 600 pounds, his voice strained but confident. Movie choreography versus real athletic ability. No contest. But between sets, when he thought the cameras weren't rolling, Marcus found himself watching YouTube compilations of Donnie's filmed fights with growing unease. The speed was undeniable, the precision uncanny, the fluidity almost supernatural. Marcus told himself it was all camera tricks and editing magic, but the doubt persisted. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away in San Francisco's Chinatown, Donnie was conducting his own preparation in a manner that would have mystified Marcus completely. The small Wing Chun school where he trained looked like a museum compared to Marcus's high-tech facility. Wooden floors worn smooth by decades of practice, traditional weapons hanging from simple hooks, the scent of incense mixing with honest sweat. Donnie moved through his forms with meditative precision, each technique flowing into the next like water, finding its natural course. His training partners were masters in their own right, men and women who had spent lifetimes perfecting arts that Marcus dismissed as dancing. The contrast was stark but hidden from public view. Marcus's preparation was all visible spectacle, social media posts of brutal training sessions, interviews promising destruction, photo shoots with his championship belts. Donnie's preparation was invisible wisdom, meditation at dawn, pressure point study with ancient texts, sparring sessions that looked more like conversations between artists than preparation for violence. Marcus finished his evening workout by knocking out another sparring partner with an illegal elbow strike that the documentary cameras captured in brutal slow motion. As medics attended to the unconscious fighter, Marcus addressed his audience with the casual callousness that had become his trademark. "That's what happens when you step into the ring with real violence," he announced, not even breathing hard. Despite 40 minutes of savage training, speed, technique, traditional martial arts, none of that matters when someone who can actually fight decides to hurt you. He flexed for the cameras, his chemically enhanced physique glistening under professional lighting while his latest victim was stretchered out of frame. "I hope Donnie Yen's insurance is paid up, because I'm about to introduce him to the difference between movies and reality." The footage would air on ESPN that night, building the narrative of Marcus as an unstoppable force of modern combat, facing off against traditional martial arts mythology. The promotional machine was creating the fight of the century. But in a quiet San Francisco school, an old master was preparing to teach a lesson that no amount of steroids or swagger could defend against. The MGM Grand Press Conference Room bust. With unprecedented energy as over 200 media members from 6 continents packed every available seat. Camera crews lined the walls 3 deep while reporters spoke in rapid-fire bursts to audiences spanning from ESPN to Hong Kong entertainment networks to traditional martial arts publications. Marcus entered first through the main doors to a cacophony of mixed reactions, thunderous cheers from his supporters, equally loud boos from martial arts purists, and the clicking storm of professional cameras documenting every step. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that emphasized his intimidating physique while projecting just enough sophistication for the international audience. Donnie appeared moments later through a side entrance with characteristic understatement. Dressed in simple black clothing that somehow commanded more respect than Marcus's designer ensemble. The room's energy shifted palpably as the legend took his seat, his mere presence lending gravity to what could have been dismissed as publicity stunt. Marcus dominated the early proceedings with characteristic bombast, delivering increasingly inflammatory soundbites designed for maximum viral impact. "This isn't going to be a fight," he announced with theatrical confidence. "It's going to be an education in real combat versus movie magic." He launched into detailed descriptions of his training regimen, his knockout power, his plans for Donnie's destruction, speaking directly to camera lenses with the practiced ease of someone addicted to attention. Traditional martial arts are beautiful museum pieces, but when real violence starts, you need real athletes who can actually break bones. Donnie remained silent throughout Marcus's performance, occasionally sipping water but showing no reaction to the verbal provocations. His calm became more unsettling than any aggressive response could have been, suggesting reserves of confidence that Marcus's bluster couldn't reach. When finally invited to respond, Donnie stood with fluid grace and walked to center stage without announcement or fanfare. The room fell silent as he positioned himself in perfect stance, his centered balance immediately visible to anyone with martial arts knowledge. "I prefer demonstrations to declarations," Donnie said simply. What happened next unfolded too quickly for most observers to fully process. Donnie moved through a brief Wing Chun form with lightning precision, each technique flowing seamlessly into the next until the sequence culminated in a single palm strike against a thick wooden board that had been placed on the table. The crack echoed through the silent room like a gunshot. The board split cleanly in half, splinters scattering across the conference table, while Donnie returned to perfect stance as if nothing had happened. That Marcus's confident smirk faltered for the first time since the controversy began. The casual display of power, delivered without apparent effort or strain, suggested capabilities that transcended anything he'd seen in his professional career. Fight promoter David Chin chose that moment of stunned silence to drop his carefully planned bombshell. "Ladies and gentlemen, this exhibition will not be fought under standard UFC rules," he announced, his voice carrying clearly through the microphone system. "We're implementing a hybrid combat system that incorporates traditional martial arts techniques alongside modern mixed martial arts. Fighters will be permitted to use pressure point applications, traditional weapons forms, and ancient combat principles that predate organized sports by centuries." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face as the implications crashed over him. His entire fighting style, his training regimen, his strategic preparation, everything was suddenly obsolete. The fight he'd agreed to was no longer in his domain of expertise. Donnie nodded approvingly at the rule announcement, his expression suggesting he'd expected this development all along. The press conference dissolved into chaos as reporters shouted questions while Marcus stared at his opponent with dawning recognition of the trap he'd walked in. As cameras flashed and voices rose, Marcus realized he'd just agreed to fight a master of traditional combat under traditional rules, the martial arts equivalent of challenging a chess grandmaster to a game using pieces he'd never seen before. The elevator ride to Marcus's penthouse suite felt like a descent into hell. Jerry Polk, Regina Fairchild, and head trainer Danny Rossetti stood in stunned silence while Marcus paced the confined space like a caged animal, his carefully constructed confidence crumbling with each passing floor. What the hell are pressure point applications? Marcus exploded the moment they entered his suite, hurling a crystal whiskey decanter against the wall where it shattered into 1,000 glittering fragments. Nobody said anything about weapons. This was supposed to be a regular fight. Jerry frantically scrolled through his phone, reading rule clarifications that made the situation progressively worse. Traditional staffs, nunchucks, and rope darts are permitted. Pressure point strikes can temporarily paralyze limbs. Ancient grappling techniques that predate modern submission holds. His voice cracked on each revelation. Danny Rossetti, who'd trained fighters for 25 years, looked genuinely bewildered. I've never even heard of half this stuff. My boxers throw punches and avoid getting hit. What's a meridian strike? Regina was already in damage control mode, her manicured fingers flying across her laptop keyboard. We need to spin this ass. Marcus accepting an even greater challenge. Champion so confident he'll fight under any rules. Make it look intentional. But Marcus wasn't listening to marketing strategies. The reality of his situation was crystallizing with terrifying clarity. He'd challenged a master of traditional martial arts to fight under traditional rules, like challenging Mozart to a piano competition while only knowing how to play air guitar. Jerry's phone buzzed with call after call from potential trainers, but each conversation ended the same way. Wing Chun masters, Kung Fu Sifus, traditional weapons experts, they all hang up when I mention it's to fight Donnie Yen. Jerry reported with growing desperation. Why? Marcus demanded, though part of him already suspected the answer. Because they respect him too much to help someone destroy him, Danny answered quietly, the first time he'd ever questioned Marcus's chances in a fight. Finally, after dozens of rejections, an elderly voice agreed to meet with them. Sifu Raymond Liu quoted a price that made Regina wince. $50,000 for 3 weeks of intensive training, but included a warning that chilled the room. You're not just fighting a man, the old master had said over the phone. You're fighting 40 years of perfected technique. Your student will need to forget everything he thinks he knows about combat. An hour later, Marcus found himself in Las Vegas, Chinatown, standing before a traditional martial arts school that looked like it belonged in another century. The building's weathered facade and simple wooden sign contrasted sharply with his chrome and glass training facility. Sifu Liu emerged from the shadows like a wraith, 5'4", 77 years old, weighing perhaps 140 pounds soaking wet. His weathered hands showed the calluses and scars of 7 decades spent striking wooden dummies and iron palm conditioning tools. Marcus threw a few demonstration punches at the heavy bag, his combinations explosive and technically sound. By any modern standard, Sifu Liu watched in silence, his ancient eyes missing nothing. When Marcus finished his display, breathing slightly hard from the effort, the old master shook his head with profound sadness. You fight with anger and muscle, Sifu Liu observed, his voice carrying the weight of accumulated wisdom. He fights with precision and spirit. We have 3 weeks to teach you 30 years of knowledge. The impossibility of the task hung in the air like incense smoke, heavy and inescapable. While Marcus struggled with alien concepts in a Las Vegas basement, Donnie Yen sat in perfect meditation posture within the peaceful confines of his San Francisco sanctuary. The small Wing Chun school occupied the 2nd floor of a Chinatown building that had housed martial arts instruction for over a century, its wooden floors worn smooth by countless generations of dedicated practitioners. Sunlight filtered through paper screens, casting geometric shadows across the training space where Donnie moved through his morning forms with the fluid precision of water finding its natural course. Each technique flowed seamlessly into the next, tan saw deflections, pack saw traps, chain punches delivered with mechanical consistency that belied their devastating effectiveness. His training partner this morning was Master Chen Wei-Ming, 78 years old, and moving with the grace of someone half his age. The elderly master had studied directly under IP Man's senior students, making him one of the last living links to the legendary grandmaster who had revolutionized Wing Chun for the modern era. The young fighter trains his body, Grandmaster Chen observed as they moved through chi saw sensitivity drills, their forearms maintaining constant contact while testing each other's balance and structure. But his spirit remains untrained. What will you teach him? Donnie's response came through movement rather than words, demonstrating a pressure point application that would have dropped a charging bull, but applying it with such restraint that his elderly partner felt only gentle pressure. That's strength. Without wisdom is merely violence, he replied softly. The philosophical discussion continued as they practiced, exploring concepts that would have been incomprehensible to Marcus. The difference between conquering opponents and conquering oneself. Using an attacker's energy against them, finding stillness within motion. These weren't abstract theories, but practical combat principles tested across centuries of application. That afternoon found Donnie at the Chinatown Community Center, teaching self-defense to a group of local children whose ages ranged from 8 to 16. His approach emphasized confidence over aggression, respect over dominance, turning potential bullying situations into opportunities for growth rather than violence. Fighting is not about proving you're stronger, Donnie explained to a shy 12-year-old girl who'd been targeted by older students. It's about showing others they don't need to hurt people to feel important. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away, Linda Nakamura sat in her sister's Berkeley apartment, watching fight promotion interviews on her laptop with growing concern. Marcus's rhetoric had become increasingly violent, his promises of destruction more graphic with each media appearance. She'd met Marcus 2 years earlier at a similar charity function, initially attracted to his confidence and success, but gradually recognizing the insecurity and need for validation that drove his behavior. His treatment of service workers, sparring partners, anyone he perceived as beneath his status had slowly eroded her respect. The discovery of his steroid stash had been the final revelation, confirming what she'd suspected about the artificial foundation of his physical dominance. When she'd confronted him about the drugs, his explosion of defensive rage had revealed the frightened child hiding beneath his muscular facade. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," he'd screamed, veins bulging in his neck as chemical. Enhancement amplified his natural aggression. "Everyone expects me to destroy this old man, and I can't look weak." Her response had been quiet but final. "You're not weak because you might lose a fight. You're weak because you need to hurt people to feel strong." That night, Linda had packed her belongings and moved in with her sister, leaving behind the penthouse lifestyle that had never felt authentic anyway. Her traditional Japanese-American upbringing had emphasized respect for elders, humility in success, and honor above personal gain, values that seemed increasingly foreign to the man she'd tried to love. As evening fell over San Francisco, Donnie concluded his training with meditation, sitting in perfect stillness while chaos built around his upcoming confrontation. News crews stalked the building's entrance. Martial arts enthusiasts gathered hoping for glimpses of the legend, and betting odds fluctuated wildly as international audiences chose sides. But within the peaceful sanctuary of traditional training, Donnie remained centered in the knowledge that this fight would teach lessons more important than victory or defeat. The question was whether his opponent possessed the wisdom to learn them. Marcus arrived at Sifu Lu's traditional school for his fifth training session, already radiating frustration like heat from an overworked engine. His hands were wrapped in bandages, covering blisters from wooden dummy training that had turned into open wounds through his impatient overuse of force. The small basement school felt claustrophobic compared to his expansive training facility. Ancient weapons hung from simple wooden pegs, their surfaces worn smooth by decades of practice. Calligraphy scrolls bearing martial arts wisdom covered walls that hadn't seen fresh paint in 20 years. The air carried the scent of liniment oil and honest sweat, unmarked by the chemical tang of energy drinks and performance enhancers. Centerline theory, Sifu Lu repeated for the 100th time, his weathered hands guiding Marcus through the basic principles of Wing Chun structure. Your power comes from skeletal alignment, not muscle tension. Relax the shoulders, sink the elbows, maintain forward pressure through proper stance. But Marcus's body fought against every correction, his muscle memory defaulting to the aggressive, tension-based approach that had dominated opponents for years. When he threw punches, his shoulders hunched with unnecessary force. When he attempted blocks, he met incoming attacks with rigid resistance instead of fluid deflection. "This mystical bullshit isn't practical," Marcus muttered after being corrected, for maintaining proper elbow position during chain punch practice. In a real fight, power beats technique every time. Sifu Lu's ancient student, Tommy Chong, 16 years old and weighing perhaps 140 pounds, stepped forward with respectful determination. Perhaps Marcus Sifu would like to test this theory? The informal sparring session that followed became a humiliation that would haunt Marcus's dreams. Tommy moved like liquid mercury, deflecting Marcus's powerful strikes with minimal effort while delivering precise counterpunches that found gaps in his defense with surgical accuracy. Every time Marcus committed to a big punch, he found himself off balance and vulnerable. Every time he tried to use his reach advantage, his attacks were trapped and redirected. After 3 minutes of being systematically dismantled by a teenager, Marcus lost control entirely. He abandoned all technique and charged with pure aggression, swinging wildly while cursing at the top of his lungs. Tommy simply stepped aside and let momentum carry the enraged fighter into the wall. You see, Sifu Lu observed sadly as Marcus picked himself up from the floor, blood trickling from his nose. Anger makes you weak. Frustration makes you stupid. How will you face a master when you cannot overcome a student? The breaking point came when Marcus attempted an illegal takedown that would have seriously injured Tommy if the teenager hadn't rolled with practiced ease. Sifu Lu's sharp command froze the session, his ancient voice carrying absolute authority. Enough, the old master declared. You refuse to empty your cup. How can we fill it with new knowledge? Marcus's response was predictably explosive. He ripped off his practice gloves and hurled them across the room, his face flushed with embarrassment and chemical-fueled rage. This traditional garbage doesn't work against real fighters. I'm wasting my time with kung fu movie nonsense. The words hung in the air like blasphemy as Marcus stormed toward the exit, his footsteps echoing off ancient wooden floors. Behind him, Sifu Lu spoke to his assembled students with profound sadness. Pride comes before the fall, the old master observed, watching his most famous student disappear into the Las Vegas night. Some lessons cannot be taught. They must be learned through pain. Tommy Chong bowed respectfully to his teacher, understanding that they had just witnessed a man choosing destruction over growth. Will he return, Sifu? Perhaps, the old master replied, returning the ancient weapons to their proper places with ceremonial care. But not until he discovers that his greatest enemy has always been himself. Outside in the parking lot, Marcus sat in his Lamborghini for 20 minutes, his hands shaking with withdrawal symptoms he hadn't yet connected to his steroid dependence. The traditional school's windows glowed with warm light as students continued their practice, their dedication, unmarked by cameras or social media documentation. For a brief moment, Marcus felt something approaching regret. Then his phone buzzed with Instagram notifications, and the familiar dopamine hit erased everything except his hunger for digital validation. He had no idea that his next 2 weeks of preparation would prove even more disastrous. Jerry Polk's hands trembled as he set down his phone in the MGM Grand's executive conference room, surrounded by fight promotion officials whose expressions ranged from ecstatic to terrified. The preliminary numbers were unlike anything in combat sports history. 20,000 arena seats sold in 48 hours, international pay-per-view pre-orders approaching 2 million buys at $89.99 each, and media rights deals spanning 6 continents. Conservative revenue projections are hitting $50 million, announced MGM's head of special events, her voice carrying disbelief at her own words. This isn't just a fight, it's a cultural phenomenon. But the financial windfall came with proportional pressure that was crushing Marcus's support team. Major sponsors were threatening to pull contracts worth $8 million if their golden boy lost to an aging movie star. The language in their agreements included specific clauses about maintaining champion status and avoiding embarrassing defeats that could damage brand association. Energy drink giant Thunderbolt had been particularly explicit in their concerns. Our demographic expects dominance, their marketing director had explained during a tense conference call. We sell power, aggression, alpha energy. If Marcus gets beaten by a senior citizen practicing ancient martial arts, our entire brand message collapses. Similar warnings came from supplement companies, athletic wear manufacturers, and luxury car dealerships that had built marketing campaigns around Marcus's image of unstoppable force. The combined financial pressure created a perfect storm of expectation that would have challenged any athlete's mental stability. ESPN's latest poll results made the situation worse. 73% of international respondents predicted Donnie would win, with martial arts communities worldwide organizing viewing parties specifically to watch Marcus lose. The betting odds had shifted dramatically as more footage of Donnie's capabilities surfaced online, showing him breaking boards with casual ease and moving with speed that defied his age. Marcus responded to mounting pressure the only way he knew. How? By increasing his chemical intake to dangerous levels. His steroid dosage climbed beyond anything he'd previously attempted, chasing the artificial confidence that had carried him through earlier challenges. The side effects were becoming harder to hide. Violent mood swings, paranoid episodes, and a pulled shoulder muscle that he concealed from his training team. During a particularly brutal sparring session, Marcus's enhancement-fueled aggression resulted in sending two partners to the hospital with injuries that would require surgery. The documentary cameras captured every moment of violence, but what they missed was Marcus injecting himself in gym bathrooms with cocktails of testosterone, growth hormone, and experimental compounds purchased from underground sources. Regina Fairchild tried desperately to manage the narrative, but social media sentiment was turning increasingly hostile. International audiences shared clips of Donnie's film fights alongside Marcus's training footage, the comparison revealing technique versus raw aggression in stark contrast. Comment sections filled with predictions of Marcus's humiliation and celebrations of traditional martial arts superiority. The breaking point came when Linda called from her sister's house in Berkeley, her voice carrying 2 years of accumulated disappointment. "I've been watching your interviews," she said without preamble. "The things you're saying about Donnie, the violence you're promising, this isn't the man I fell in love with." Marcus gripped his phone so tightly the case cracked. "I'm under incredible pressure here. Everyone expects me to destroy this old man, and I need you to believe in me." "I would believe in you if you showed even basic respect," Linda replied sadly. "But you've turned this into something ugly. You're not fighting for sport or competition. You're fighting to hurt someone who never did anything wrong." The conversation ended with Marcus screaming into a dead line, his voice echoing through his empty penthouse while Linda's absence became a physical ache in his chemically altered nervous system. He'd lost the one person whose opinion mattered more than social media metrics, and no amount of artificial enhancement could fill that void. As the fight approached, Marcus found himself trapped between impossible expectations and mounting evidence that he'd made the greatest mistake of his professional life. But pride and chemistry wouldn't let him back down, even as his world began collapsing around him. 2 weeks before the scheduled fight, Marcus arranged a secret sparring session that would never appear in any documentary footage. Through underground connections in the martial arts community, Jerry had finally found someone willing to work with them. Master Tommy Chung, a former student of IP Man's direct lineage who had quietly trained several UFC fighters in traditional techniques. The private session took place at an abandoned warehouse in North Las Vegas, far from cameras and social media documentation. Master Chung arrived carrying a simple canvas bag containing protective gear that looked like museum pieces compared to Marcus's high-tech equipment. At 63 years old, Chung stood 5'6" and weighed perhaps 160 pounds, his slight frame making Marcus appear gigantic by comparison. But there was something in the older man's eyes, a quiet confidence that reminded Marcus uncomfortably of Donnie's expression at the press conference. "This will be instructional sparring only," Master Chung explained as they took positions in the empty warehouse space. "I will show you what your opponent can do, so you understand what you're facing." Marcus nodded impatiently, eager to test his newly learned techniques against someone from Donnie's martial arts tradition. He'd spent 2 weeks drilling basic Wing Chun principles, and his natural athleticism had allowed him to master several fundamental techniques that looked impressive during solo practice. The session began with Marcus attempting to establish his usual aggressive rhythm, powerful jabs to set up knockout combinations, footwork designed to cut off escape routes, the pressure-based approach that had overwhelmed dozens of professional fighters. But Master Chung moved like he was in a different dimension of time and space. Every punch Marcus threw was deflected, with minimal effort, redirected past its target through techniques that seemed to violate physics. When Marcus tried to clinch, His arms were trapped and manipulated through joint locks that controlled his entire body through finger pressure. Within 30 seconds, Marcus found himself completely frustrated. His power advantage meant nothing when his attacks couldn't land. His reach advantage disappeared when every extension was trapped and turned against him. His conditioning became irrelevant when Master Chung expended no energy while making him work desperately hard. The older man's counterattacks came with surgical precision, light taps that found pressure points Marcus didn't know existed, causing his left arm to go temporarily numb. Palm strikes that looked gentle but doubled him over with pain. Foot sweeps that put him on the ground without apparent force. After 10 minutes of systematic dismantlement, Marcus abandoned all technique and reverted to pure aggression. He charged with wild haymakers, threw illegal elbows, attempted takedowns that would have been fouls in sanctioned competition. Master Chung handled each escalation with calm competence, never losing his temper or responding with matching violence. The breaking point came when Marcus, bloodied and desperate, threw a punch with every ounce of his chemically enhanced strength. Master Chung caught his wrist mid-swing, applied a pressure point technique, and watched Marcus collapse to his knees as his entire arm went dead. "This is what Donnie Yen learned as a child," Master Chung explained gently, helping Marcus back to his feet. "What you experienced today was a gentle introduction to what you'll face." Marcus sat in his Lamborghini afterward, ice packs pressed against his face, finally understanding the magnitude of his mistake. He'd agreed to fight a master of warfare while knowing only how to brawl. Unable to sleep, Marcus spent the night researching his opponent with the desperate intensity of a student cramming for final exams. What he discovered in the depths of the internet made his earlier ignorance appear almost criminal in its scope. Donnie Yen wasn't just a movie star who happened to know martial arts. He was a legitimate master who happened to make movies. Multiple black belt certifications in disciplines Marcus had never heard of. Military training with elite units. Street fighting experience in Hong Kong before his film career began. Competition victories in full-contact tournaments that predated modern MMA by decades. The film clips Marcus had dismissed as choreographed fantasy were actually demonstrations of techniques Donnie had mastered through 40 years of authentic training. The speed wasn't camera trickery. It was the result of neurological pathways refined through millions of repetitions. The precision wasn't editing magic. It was what happened when someone devoted their entire life to perfecting movement. Marcus watched interview footage where respected fighters praised Donnie's authentic abilities. Jackie Chan describing him as the most technically gifted martial artist I've ever worked with. Jet Li calling him a master who happens to act, not an actor who learned to fight. UFC veterans who had worked with him as a stunt coordinator, speaking with genuine reverence about his capabilities. Most damning was a documentary segment showing Donnie's training with traditional masters, footage that revealed the philosophical foundation underlying his physical skills. He spoke about martial arts as a path to self-improvement, a way of protecting others, a responsibility that came with the ability to cause harm. True strength, Donnie had said in one interview, is knowing when not to use your power. Anyone can learn to hurt people. Very few learn to heal them. The contrast with Marcus's own public statements was stark and shameful. Where Donnie spoke of protecting the weak, Marcus had promised destruction. Where Donnie emphasized respect and humility, Marcus had delivered arrogance and contempt. Where Donnie demonstrated restraint, Marcus had showcased aggression. At3. In the morning, Marcus called Jerry with panic creeping into his voice. "Did you know he was a real fighter before the movies?" Jerry's exhausted response carried years of frustration. "I tried to tell you, but you wouldn't listen. You were so convinced that movie stars were fake that you never bothered researching who you were challenging." The weight of his ignorance settled on Marcus like a physical burden. He'd built his entire promotional strategy around the premise that he was a real fighter facing a Hollywood pretender. But the reality was the exact opposite. He was a chemically enhanced brawler who had challenged a legitimate master to combat in the master's own domain. Marcus typed and deleted dozens of text messages to Linda, trying to find words that might explain his growing understanding of the mistake he'd made. Finally, at dawn, he sent a simple message. "I think I made a mistake. A big one." Her response came hours later, brief but not unkind. The first step to fixing a mistake is admitting you made one. But admission was easier than action. With less than 2 weeks remaining before the fight, Marcus was trapped by his own promotional machine. Sponsors had invested millions in his image of dominance. Media outlets had built narratives around his predicted destruction of traditional martial arts. Fans had purchased tickets expecting to witness the superiority of modern athleticism over ancient techniques. Backing out wasn't just impossible. It would destroy his career and confirm every criticism his opponents had made about his character. He was committed to a path that he now understood led directly toward humiliation, or worse, as morning sunlight streamed through his penthouse windows. Marcus realized he'd become a prisoner of his own arrogance, locked in a cage built from pride, chemicals, and the desperate need for validation that had driven every decision of his adult life. The key to his freedom lay in admitting weakness. But that was the one thing his enhanced ego couldn't allow him to do. The second press conference was supposed to be Marcus's opportunity for redemption, a chance to show the international media that he'd developed respect for his opponent and understanding of the martial arts traditions he'd initially dismissed. He'd spent hours crafting a statement that acknowledged Donnie's legitimate achievements while maintaining confidence in his own abilities. But the Beverly Hills Hilton ballroom buzzed with an energy that demanded spectacle over sportsmanship. The assembled media represented a global audience hungry for controversy, drama, and the kind of inflammatory soundbites that generated viral content. Pay-per-view executives filled the front rows, their investment requiring maximum promotional value from every public appearance. Marcus began with his prepared remarks, speaking with unusual humility about his opponent's credentials and expressing honor at facing such an accomplished martial artist. Donnie Yen represents decades of authentic training and philosophical development, he read from his notes. I've come to understand that this exhibition will test not just physical abilities, but character and wisdom. The respectful tone drew polite applause, but Marcus could sense the audience's disappointment. Reporters exchanged glances that suggested his mature approach wasn't providing the content they needed. Social media metrics required controversy, and respect generated fewer clicks than outrageous behavior. The first leading question came from a TMZ reporter. Marcus, your previous statements suggested you could knock out this grandpa easily. Are you backing down from those predictions? Marcus felt the familiar pressure of performance expectations, the need to maintain his aggressive brand while showing newfound respect for traditional martial arts. I have tremendous respect for Master Yen's achievements, he replied carefully. But respect doesn't change the fact that modern athletic training and conditioning provide advantages that, so you still think you'll destroy him? Another reporter interrupted, pushing for more provocative language. The crowd of executives, promoters, and media representatives leaned forward expectantly. Marcus could see dollar signs in their eyes, revenue projections that required him to generate the kind of controversy that had built his career. His prepared statement of respectful confidence seemed inadequate against their hunger for spectacle. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, Marcus began reverting to his old patterns. His language grew more aggressive, his predictions more violent, his dismissal of traditional martial arts more pronounced. The audience responded with the kind of engagement that fed his validation addiction. Look, I've done my homework now, Marcus announced, abandoning his notes entirely. Donnie Yen was impressive for his era, but sports science has evolved. Modern fighters are stronger, faster, better conditioned. Respect doesn't win fights, superior athletes do. The crowd erupted in the kind of chaos that generated headlines. Marcus felt the familiar rush of controlling a room through sheer force. Of personality, his carefully prepared humility dissolving under the intoxicating pressure of performance. His final statement sealed his fate. When I knock out this old man, everyone will see that real fighting beats movie fighting. Traditional martial arts are beautiful museum pieces, but when violence starts, you need someone who can actually break bones. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud while cameras captured every angle of his renewed arrogance. Donnie's expression shifted subtly from hopeful disappointment to something approaching sadness, as if watching a student fail a test he desperately wanted them to pass. After the press conference, Donnie approached Marcus privately in the hotel corridor, his voice carrying paternal disappointment. I hoped you had learned something during these weeks of preparation. I see I was wrong. He paused at the elevator doors, turning back with the kind of gentle authority that had made him a respected teacher as well as a feared fighter. Tomorrow, I will teach you the lesson your parents should have taught you about respect. The elevator. Doors closed on Marcus's stammering attempt at explanation, leaving him alone in the corridor with the crushing realization that he'd just thrown away his last chance for redemption through his own inability to resist the spotlight's corrupting influence. 1 week before the fight, Marcus experienced what he initially interpreted as his greatest training breakthrough. After endless frustration with traditional techniques, something finally clicked during his morning session at a private gym in Henderson, Nevada. The Wing Chun combination that had eluded him for weeks, Pak saw trap leading to chain punches, finishing with a palm strike, flowed together with devastating effectiveness. His sparring partners, two professional middleweights brought in specifically for final preparation, found themselves overwhelmed by Marcus's newfound technical precision. The traditional techniques, powered by his natural athleticism and chemical enhancement, created combinations they'd never encountered in conventional MMA training. "This is it," Marcus announced to his documentary cameras, his confidence fully restored after weeks of doubt. "I finally understand what all that traditional stuff is about. It's just different tools for the same job, hurting people." The session culminated in Marcus executing a perfect trapping sequence that left both sparring partners unable to defend effectively. His natural power, enhanced by proper technique, created a fighting style that seemed to bridge modern athleticism with ancient wisdom. For the first time since accepting the challenge, Marcus felt like he belonged in the same arena as his legendary opponent. Sports media picked up on his improved performance immediately. Training footage showed Marcus moving with unprecedented fluidity, combining traditional martial arts principles with his natural aggression in ways that shifted betting odds slightly in his favor. ESPN analysts who had previously predicted his destruction began hedging their assessments. Kane appears to have solved the puzzle of traditional martial arts integration, one commentator observed during the evening highlight show. If he can maintain this technical level while preserving his knockout power, this fight becomes much more competitive than originally anticipated. Marcus basked in the renewed respect, his social media feeds filling with comments from fans who had begun to doubt his chances. The validation felt particularly sweet after weeks of international criticism and sponsor concerns about backing a potential loser. But that evening brought news that shattered his restored confidence like glass hitting concrete. His phone rang. With Dr. Martinez's familiar number, his private physician who handled all medical requirements outside the normal athletic commission oversight. "Marcus, we need to discuss the pre-fight medical requirements," Dr. Martinez said without preamble. The Nevada Athletic Commission is requiring comprehensive drug testing 24 hours before the exhibition. All performance-enhancing substances must be completely clear from your system. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. For 3 years, his entire fighting foundation had been built on carefully managed chemical enhancement, testosterone, growth hormone, EPO for endurance, and experimental compounds that pushed his recovery and strength beyond natural human limits. "How long do I need to be clean?" Marcus asked, though he already suspected the devastating answer. "Complete clearance requires a minimum of 72 hours for the substances you've been using. Some of the newer compounds might take longer." Marcus stared at his championship belts hanging on the penthouse wall, understanding with horrible clarity that he would enter the most important fight of his life in the worst physical condition he'd experienced since becoming professional. The strength, endurance, and recovery speed that had defined his career would be stripped away just when he needed them most. The irony was perfect and cruel, just as he'd finally learned to integrate traditional techniques with his natural abilities. He was about to discover what those natural abilities actually were without pharmaceutical assistance. As withdrawal symptoms began their inevitable assault on his nervous system, Marcus realized he'd built his entire identity on a foundation of artificial enhancement. In less than a week, he would face a master of authentic martial arts while experiencing authentic weakness for the first time in years. The fight he'd entered as a chemically enhanced destroyer would be fought as whatever remained when all the enhancement was stripped away, and Marcus had no idea who that person actually was. 3 days before the fight, Marcus woke up in hell. His body convulsed with withdrawal symptoms that no amount of willpower could suppress. Muscles cramping, joints aching, sweat pouring from every pore despite the penthouse's perfect climate control. The chemically enhanced Superman who had dominated opponents for 3 years was dissolving into a shaking, nauseous shell of his former self. He stumbled to the bathroom and vomited bile, his stomach rejecting even water as his system rebelled against the absence of performance enhancers that had become as essential as oxygen. The man staring back from the mirror looked like a stranger, pale, hollow-eyed, trembling with weakness that terrified him more than any opponent ever had. Danny Rossetti noticed immediately when Marcus arrived at their final training session. "You look like death," the trainer observed bluntly, watching Marcus struggle with warm-up exercises that should have been effortless. "What's wrong?" "Just pre-fight nerves," Marcus lied, gripping the heavy bag to hide his shaking hands. His first punch, which should have rattled the entire structure, barely moved the leather. The power that had defined his career was evaporating along with the chemicals that had created it. Jerry Polk arrived an hour later to find Marcus sitting in the corner between rounds, breathing heavily from exertion that wouldn't have fazed him the previous week. "The press wants a final training session interview," Jerry announced, then noticed Marcus's condition. "Jesus, what happened to you?" Marcus attempted a normal training demonstration for the cameras, but his movements lacked the explosive power that had become his trademark. Punches that had shattered bones in the past barely dented the heavy bag. Combinations that had flowed like machine gun fire now came out sluggish and disconnected. "Champion looks tired," one cameraman whispered to his partner. "Maybe the pressure's getting to him." They had no idea they were witnessing the real Marcus Kane for the first time in 3 years, the natural athlete buried beneath layers of chemical enhancement, struggling to remember what his actual capabilities were without pharmaceutical assistance. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away, Donnie continued his serene preparation in the San Francisco school where he'd trained since adolescence. His morning meditation lasted 2 hours, followed by forms practice that looked more like dance than combat preparation. When asked by visiting reporters about his opponent's apparent conditioning problems, Donnie's response carried subtle concern. "Fighting requires harmony between body and spirit," he observed quietly. "When that harmony is disrupted, everything becomes more difficult." The statement would be interpreted as traditional martial arts philosophy, but Donnie's experienced eyes had noticed details at the press conference that others missed. The slight tremor in Marcus's hands, the way he avoided direct eye contact, the subtle signs of a system in chemical rebellion. Back in Las Vegas, Marcus spent the night curled up on his bathroom floor, alternating between fever chills and nausea that made sleep impossible. The fight was 72 hours away, and every hour of withdrawal made him weaker than the last. For the first time since agreeing to the exhibition, Marcus understood with terrifying clarity that he was about to face a master of traditional combat while experiencing his own body's limitations for the first time in his adult career. The artificial foundation of his confidence had been stripped away, leaving only the question of who Marcus Kane actually was when reduced to his natural abilities. The answer, he feared, was about to be revealed in front of 20,000 witnesses and millions of pay-per-view viewers worldwide. Fight day arrived with the weight of destiny pressing down on Las Vegas like a physical force. The MGM Grand Garden Arena buzzed with an energy that transcended ordinary sporting events, transformed into a cultural battleground where tradition would clash with modernity, wisdom would test arrogance, and legends would either be born or destroyed. Marcus woke at dawn unable to stand without gripping the bed frame for support. 72 hours of withdrawal had reduced him to a trembling shadow of his former self, his body rebelling against the absence of chemicals that had become its life support system. Every joint ached, every muscle cramped, and his famous knockout power felt as distant as childhood memories that he disguised his condition with extra stimulants and prescription painkillers that wouldn't show up on pre-fight testing, creating a pharmaceutical cocktail designed to mask weakness rather than generate strength. The face he presented to his team looked haggard but determined, hiding the terror that gnawed at his chemically altered nervous system. "You ready for this?" Danny Rossetti asked during their final preparation meeting, studying Marcus's pale complexion with growing concern. "You don't look right." "I'm fine," Marcus snapped, the lie coming easier with repetition. Just focused on destroying this old man. The arena filled throughout the day with an audience that represented a cultural divide unprecedented in combat. Sports. Traditional martial arts schools had organized viewing parties worldwide, their members traveling thousands of miles to witness their art's representation on the sport's biggest stage. Conversely, modern MMA gyms had rallied around Marcus as their champion against outdated fighting methods. Celebrity guests reflected the same divide. Jackie Chan, Jet Li, and Wesley Snipes supporting Donnie from ringside seats, while current UFC champions and American action stars backed Marcus from the opposite side of the arena. The atmosphere crackled with the tension of competing philosophies about strength, respect, and what it meant to be a warrior. Marcus's entrance was pure theater designed to mask his physical deterioration. Pyrotechnics erupting like military. Bombardment, heavy metal music pounding through arena speakers, smoke machines creating an apocalyptic atmosphere befitting his Destroyer nickname. He strutted down the entrance ramp with exaggerated swagger, his championship belts gleaming under television lights, while fireworks painted the arena in aggressive reds and oranges. But close-up cameras revealed what theatrical production couldn't hide. The slight tremor in his hands as he raised his arms to acknowledge the crowd, the way he gripped the cage door for support that appeared confident but stemmed from necessity, the hollowness in his eyes that suggested internal collapse masked by external bravado. Donnie's entrance provided stark contrast in its simplicity. No pyrotechnics, no aggressive music, no elaborate costume. Just a man in simple black walking calmly toward his destiny while traditional Chinese instruments played softly through the arena speakers. The crowd's response shifted from respectful silence to thunderous applause as martial arts communities worldwide recognized the approaching legend. His movement down the entrance ramp carried the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable in his own skin, every step demonstrating the centered balance that came from 4 decades of authentic training. Where Marcus had performed aggression, Donnie simply existed in perfect harmony with the moment. In the final minutes before entering the octagon, Marcus caught Donnie's eye through the chain-link fence. The older man nodded with genuine respect, and for one terrible moment, Marcus wanted to apologize for everything. The disrespect, the arrogance, the cultural ignorance that had created this confrontation. But 20,000 people were chanting his name. Cameras were broadcasting to millions worldwide, and pride wouldn't allow the weakness that honesty would require. Instead, Marcus bounced nervously on his feet, trying to appear confident despite his shaking hands, while across the cage a master prepared to teach him the most important lesson of his life. The referee's final instructions echoed hollowly in Marcus's ears as he stood in his corner, trying to control the trembling that withdrawal and terror had made unavoidable. His hands, wrapped in regulation tape, felt like they belonged to someone else. Weak, unreliable, stripped of the chemical power that had defined his identity for 3 years. Donnie stood perfectly still in the opposite corner, eyes closed in final meditation, while chaos erupted around them. 20,000 voices created a wall of sound that seemed to press against the octagon from every direction, but the legend remained centered in his own space, completely immune to external pressure. The bell rang with the finality of a judge's gavel. Marcus charged immediately, desperation driving him toward the aggressive tactics that had always served as both weapon and shield. His opening combination, overhand right followed by left hook to the body, carried every ounce of his remaining strength, designed to end the fight before his weakness could be exposed. But Donnie wasn't there. The older man had moved with liquid precision, a simple sidestep that made Marcus's explosive charge look clumsy and predictable. As Marcus stumbled past his intended target, Donnie's left hand performed a handsaw deflection that redirected the momentum while his right delivered a precise palm strike to Marcus's solar plexus. The impact felt like being struck by lightning, concentrated into a single point. Marcus doubled over, gasping for air that wouldn't come, his diaphragm paralyzed by a technique that looked gentle but had been refined across centuries of practical application. The crowd's roar shifted from excitement to awe as 20,000 people witnessed the first exchange between modern athleticism and traditional mastery. Marcus had thrown his best shot with maximum commitment, and it had been neutralized with an economy of movement that seemed to mock everything he thought he knew about fighting. "Jesus," Danny Rossetti muttered from ringside, his voice barely audible over the arena noise. How did he make that look so easy? Marcus backed against the cage, his face flushed with embarrassment as much as oxygen debt. The withdrawal symptoms that had plagued him for days suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the realization that his opponent existed in a completely different dimension of combat understanding. His second attack came from desperation. A powerful leg kick designed to test Donnie's mobility and establish some measure of control. But as his shin approached its target, Donnie's hands moved in perfect synchronization, one trapping the incoming limb while the other delivered a pressure point strike that instantly numbed Marcus's entire leg. The technique was so precise, so effortless, that most of the audience missed its significance. But Marcus felt his right leg go dead from hip to ankle, supporting his weight through pure skeletal structure while nerve function shut down completely. What the hell was that? Marcus gasped, staring at Donnie with growing panic. Donnie's response came through demonstration rather than explanation. His hands moved in traditional Wing Chun patterns that looked like flowing water but struck with surgical precision. Pak saw traps that controlled Marcus's arms, Tin saw deflections that neutralized his attacks, chain punches that found gaps in his defense with mathematical accuracy. Each technique built on the previous one, creating a systematic dismantlement that showcased 40 years of perfected skill against 3 days of withdrawal weakness. Marcus's famous power became irrelevant when his punches couldn't reach their target. His conditioning meant nothing when every movement was anticipated and countered. The martial arts section of the crowd erupted in appreciation for techniques they recognized from decades of study, while modern MMA fans watched in stunned silence as their champion was systematically educated by methods they'd never seen. Marcus stumbled backward, blood trickling from his nose where a perfectly timed chain punch had found its mark, finally understanding that he wasn't just facing an opponent. He was confronting the accumulated wisdom of centuries, embodied in a man who had spent his entire life perfecting the art of combat. The lesson had begun, and Marcus was learning that all his chemical enhancement had never made him anything more than a very strong student facing a true master. Marcus wiped blood from his nose with the back of his glove, the metallic taste sharp in his mouth as he tried to process what was happening to him. Every attack he launched seemed to feed directly into Donnie's defensive systems, like trying to punch water only to find it redirecting his force back against him. "Come on," Marcus roared, more to convince himself than to intimidate his opponent. He launched a desperate combination: jab, cross, left hook, right uppercut, throwing every technique with the wild abandon of someone whose careful strategy had already collapsed. Donnie moved through the assault like he was performing a dance choreographed specifically for Marcus's movements. Each punch was deflected with minimal contact, redirected past its target through techniques that seemed to violate the laws of physics. The jab was Pak saw trapped, the cross was Tin saw deflected, the hook was ducked with perfect timing, and the uppercut found only empty air as Donnie had already moved to an angle that made the attack impossible. The counteroffensive came immediately, a series of chain punches delivered with machine-like precision that found gaps in Marcus's defense he didn't know existed. Each strike was perfectly calibrated, causing pain without permanent damage, teaching without destroying, demonstrating the difference between violence and martial arts. Marcus felt his left arm go numb from another pressure point application. The technique so subtle that cameras barely captured it, but so effective that his entire limb became temporarily useless. He stared at his dead arm in horror, understanding for the first time that his opponent possessed knowledge that transcended anything he'd encountered in modern competition. "This isn't possible," Marcus muttered, backing against the cage while trying to shake feeling back into his paralyzed limb. But Donnie was already demonstrating the next lesson. His footwork created angles that made Marcus's reach advantage meaningless, positioning him perfectly to deliver strikes while remaining outside the range of retaliation. It was like fighting a ghost that could become solid just long enough to inflict precise damage before dissolving back into untouchable space. That a perfectly timed foot sweep sent Marcus crashing to the canvas. The takedown executed with such leverage and timing that his 245-pound frame hit the mat like he weighed nothing. Before he could attempt to stand, Donnie had applied a submission hold that Marcus didn't recognize, something that controlled his entire body through pressure applied to his wrist and shoulder. "Yield," Donnie said quietly, his voice carrying easily over the arena and noise despite its softness. There is no shame in recognizing superior technique. But Marcus's pride, even more than his body, had been chemically altered over the years. The suggestion of surrender triggered a rage response that overrode logic, pain, and the clear evidence that he was hopelessly outmatched. "Never," Marcus screamed, using pure desperation to break free from the submission and regain his feet. His withdrawal-weakened body found reserves of adrenaline that temporarily masked his physical deterioration. The crowd fell silent as they witnessed something unprecedented in professional combat. A fighter choosing continued punishment over the wisdom of surrender. Pride overriding preservation instincts that should have stopped the fight minutes earlier. Donnie's expression shifted from patient instruction to something approaching sadness, like a teacher watching a promising student choose failure over growth. He positioned himself at center cage, hands open rather than closed into fists, his posture suggesting defense rather than attack. "This is not about fighting," Donnie said, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed arena. "This is about respect." The words hit Marcus harder than any physical strike, exposing the emptiness at the core of everything he'd built his identity around. But facing that emptiness required a different kind of strength than he'd ever developed, and his chemically altered ego couldn't surrender the performance that had become his prison. Instead, Marcus charged again, throwing wild punches powered by desperation rather than technique. While 20,000 people watched a man choose destruction over the wisdom that could have saved him, Marcus rose from the canvas one more time, his legs shaking from exhaustion and withdrawal, blood streaming from cuts above both eyes that made the arena lights blur into painful halos. His famous physique, built through years of chemical enhancement, had been systematically dismantled by techniques that turned his own aggression against him. But as he wiped blood from his vision, something penetrated the fog of pride and pain that had driven him to this moment. In the crowd behind Donnie, he spotted Linda sitting ringside, her face wet with tears that weren't falling from fear for his safety. They were tears of shame at what he'd become. She wasn't crying because he was losing a fight. She was crying because she was watching someone she'd once loved reveal himself as exactly the kind of person she'd tried to help him avoid becoming. The realization hit harder than any of Donnie's perfectly placed strikes. For 3 years, Marcus had convinced himself that strength meant never backing down, never showing weakness, never admitting that someone else might possess knowledge he lacked. But looking at Linda's expression, he finally understood the difference between strength and stupidity. Donnie waited patiently at center cage, his hands open in a gesture that offered respect rather than demanded surrender. His breathing remained controlled despite 20 minutes of combat, his technique unmarked by fatigue or frustration, his expression carrying the patience of someone who understood that the most important victories happened inside the mind rather than inside the octagon. "This is not about fighting," Donnie repeated, his voice cutting through the arena's tension like a blade through silk. "This is about respect." The words echoed in Marcus's chemically confused consciousness, finally penetrating the pride that had made him immune to wisdom. He remembered his grandfather's lessons about honoring those who had walked the path before you, teachings that had been buried under layers of artificial confidence and social media validation. Marcus looked around the arena, at the cameras, recording his destruction, at the crowd that had paid to watch him prove his superiority, at the promotional machine that had built fortunes on his image of dominance. For the first time in his adult life, he saw the performance clearly, understood how completely he'd been trapped by the need to maintain a facade that had nothing to do with actual strength. The hardest choice of his life crystallized in that moment of clarity. He could continue fighting and suffer injuries that might end his career, protecting an ego that had already been exposed as hollow. Or he could choose the path that required real courage, admitting that he'd been wrong, that his opponent deserved respect, that true strength sometimes meant knowing when to stop. Marcus walked slowly to center cage, his movements deliberate despite his physical deterioration. The arena fell completely silent as 20,000 people sensed they were witnessing something unprecedented in professional combat. He looked directly into Donnie's eyes, intelligent, compassionate eyes that held no anger despite the disrespect. They'd endured and made the first genuinely mature decision of his enhanced career. Marcus tapped his chest 3 times with his right hand, the traditional gesture of submission that transcended any official rules or referee intervention. Then, to the shock of everyone watching, he dropped to one knee and bowed his head in the classical gesture of respect from student to master. "I was wrong," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the arena's perfect acoustics. "You tried to teach me, and I was too proud to learn." The crowd's response was unlike anything in combat sports history. Not the roar of bloodlust satisfied, but something approaching reverence for a moment that transcended entertainment to become genuine transformation. Donnie immediately stepped forward, helping Marcus back to his feet with gentle hands that had delivered precise violence moments before. His embrace was that of a teacher welcoming a student who had finally chosen wisdom over ego. "Now," Donnie whispered in Marcus's ear, "you begin to understand what it means to be a warrior." The lesson was complete, but Marcus suspected his real education was just beginning. The MGM Grand Garden Arena erupted in the most extraordinary reaction in combat sports history. 20,000 people rising to their feet, not in celebration of victory, but in recognition of transformation. The applause wasn't the bloodthirsty roar that typically followed knockout finishes, but something deeper, more respectful, acknowledging they'd witnessed a moment that transcended entertainment to become genuine human growth. Marcus stood supported by Donnie's steady hands, his legs still trembling from withdrawal and exhaustion, but his eyes clearer than they'd been in years. The artificial confidence that had driven every decision of his adult life had been stripped away, leaving only the authentic person he'd buried beneath layers of chemical enhancement and desperate validation seeking. The referee approached uncertainly, unsure how to officially classify what had just occurred. Technical submissions were common, but voluntary surrender followed by traditional respect ceremonies existed outside normal athletic commission protocols. After brief consultation with ringside officials, he raised Donnie's hand while both fighters embraced its center cage. Marcus requested the microphone with shaking hands, his voice barely controlled as he addressed the global audience that had witnessed his humiliation and rebirth. "I came here tonight thinking I was a fighter," he began, pausing to steady himself against emotion that felt foreign after years of chemically suppressed vulnerability. "I learned I was just a bully who'd gotten good at hurting people." His voice grew stronger as he continued, finding power and honesty that no pharmaceutical enhancement had ever provided. "Master Yen didn't just defeat me. He taught me what martial arts really means. It's not about proving you're the strongest. It's about becoming the person you're meant to be." The crowd's response shifted from supportive to genuinely moved as Marcus continued his confession. "I apologize to Master Yen, to martial arts masters everywhere, and to everyone who believed I could be better than what I showed you." He looked directly at Linda in the audience, tears flowing freely down his battered face. "Especially to those who tried to teach me respect when I was too proud to listen." Donnie took the microphone with characteristic grace, his words carrying the weight of centuries of martial arts wisdom. "Strength without honor is merely violence. True victory comes not from defeating others, but from conquering the worst parts of ourselves." He placed a respectful hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Tonight, we both won something more valuable than any championship." Post-fight interviews revealed the depth of Marcus's transformation. He openly discussed his steroid use, taking full responsibility for the chemical foundation of his previous success. "I built my career on lies," he admitted to shocked reporters. "Performance enhancers, arrogance, and bullying people who couldn't fight back. That ends tonight." Medical examinations confirmed what many had suspected. Marcus had fought completely. Clean for the first time in 3 years, his natural abilities finally revealed without pharmaceutical masking. The man who emerged from the MGM Grand that night was physically diminished but spiritually strengthened, ready to rebuild his life on authentic foundations rather than artificial enhancement. 6 months after the fight that changed everything, Marcus Kane walked through the doors of a small traditional martial arts school in Las Vegas, Chinatown. carrying a simple canvas duffel bag instead of his former entourage of cameras, managers, and hangers-on seeking reflected glory from his artificial success. He wore plain black clothing similar to what he'd seen Donnie wear, the expensive designer gear that had once defined his image replaced by humble training attire that prioritized function over fashion. His physique, while still impressive, had settled into natural proportions without chemical enhancement, revealing the authentic athlete that had always existed beneath layers of pharmaceutical augmentation. Sifu Raymond Liu greeted him with the respectful nod reserved for students who had learned humility through genuine suffering. The old master's school had become Marcus's refuge, a place where traditional values of respect, discipline, and continuous self-improvement gradually replaced the toxic culture of dominance and validation-seeking that had nearly destroyed his life. "Good morning, Marcus," Sifu Liu said simply, using his given name rather than any manufactured nickname. "Are you ready to continue learning?" The contrast with his former training environment was profound and deliberate. Where Kane Combat Academy had featured high-tech equipment and professional lighting designed to showcase his dominance, this traditional school emphasized wooden floors worn smooth by decades of honest practice, simple equipment that had served generations of dedicated students, and the kind of authentic atmosphere that couldn't be manufactured for social media content. Marcus's UFC return, fighting clean for the first time in years, had initially been disastrous. His first two fights were losses to opponents he would have easily defeated while enhanced, his natural abilities insufficient against competitors who hadn't undergone his journey of chemical dependency and withdrawal. The losses hurt his pride, but strengthened his character, teaching him that failure could be educational rather than catastrophic. But his third fight back showcased the integration of traditional martial arts with his natural athleticism in ways that surprised everyone, including himself. The hybrid fighting style that emerged from months of humble training under traditional masters combined Wing Chun principles with modern applications, creating something uniquely his own rather than borrowed from pharmaceutical enhancement. More importantly, his approach to competition had fundamentally changed. Where he'd once fought to dominate and humiliate opponents, he now competed to test his growth, to honor the traditions he was learning, and to demonstrate that strength could coexist with respect. Post-fight interviews revealed a man who praised his opponents regardless of outcome, thanked his teachers publicly, and spoke about martial arts as a path to self-improvement rather than a method for destroying others. Linda had returned 3 months earlier, drawn not to his renewed success, but to the authentic person who had emerged from the wreckage of his chemically enhanced persona. Their relationship, rebuilt on shared values rather than shared lifestyle, had developed the kind of depth that his previous shallow existence had made impossible. "I fell in love with who you were trying to become," she explained one evening, as they planned their wedding. "Not who you were pretending to be." Their engagement announcement had generated positive media attention, but Marcus no longer measured his worth through public validation. The man who had once needed millions of social media followers to feel valuable now found fulfillment in the quiet approval of traditional masters and the genuine love of someone who respected his character rather than his championship belts. The small Las Vegas Chinatown martial arts school buzzed with the controlled energy of serious training as Marcus Kane taught his evening class, his voice carrying the patient authority of someone who had learned wisdom through genuine suffering and hard-won growth. "Fighting is not about defeating others," he explained to the mixed group of young students, boys and girls ranging from 8 to 16, who hung on his every word not because he was a famous UFC champion, but because he spoke with the authenticity that only comes from authentic transformation. "It's about conquering yourself." The lesson had become his personal philosophy, words that would have been meaningless during his chemically enhanced years, but now represented the foundation of everything he was trying to build. His teaching style emphasized confidence over aggression, respect over dominance, using potential confrontations as opportunities for growth rather than violence that a shy 12-year-old girl named Maria, who'd been targeted by older bullies at school, practiced the self-defense techniques that Marcus demonstrated with growing confidence. Her progress reminded him of his own journey, the realization that true strength came from internal development rather than external dominance. "Remember," Marcus continued, adjusting Maria's stance with gentle precision, "the The goal isn't to hurt the person bothering you. It's to show them they don't need to hurt others to feel important. Through the school's windows, he could see the media crews that occasionally gathered, hoping to capture footage of the reformed champion for human interest stories. But Marcus no longer structured his life around cameras and public attention. The man who had once needed constant validation now found fulfillment in quiet moments of genuine teaching and personal growth. His UFC career had stabilized around his natural abilities rather than chemical enhancement. He'd won his last 4 fights using the hybrid fighting style developed through traditional training, earning respect from competitors and fans who appreciated technical skill over manufactured dominance. More importantly, he'd become known for post-fight behavior that honored both victory and defeat, treating opponents as fellow martial artists rather than enemies to be destroyed. Linda entered the school as evening training concluded, her presence bringing the warm smile that had become Marcus's most reliable source of happiness. Their wedding was planned for the following month, a small, traditional ceremony that emphasized commitment over spectacle, authentic relationships over social media content. "How was class tonight?" she asked, watching him help students organize equipment with the same attention he'd once devoted to counting social media followers. "Good," Marcus replied, meaning it completely. "Maria's getting stronger, Tommy's learning patience, and David's starting to understand that technique beats aggression." As students filed out with respectful bows, Marcus noticed a familiar figure observing from across the street. Donnie Yen stood in the evening shadows, watching the conclusion of training with the quiet approval of a master whose most important lesson had finally taken root. Their eyes met through the window, and Donnie nodded once, a gesture of recognition between teacher and student that transcended their brief combat encounter to acknowledge something more valuable than victory or defeat. Marcus bowed respectfully in return, understanding that his real education was ongoing, that strength was a journey rather than a destination, and that the most important battles were fought not in arenas but in the quiet moments where character was built through daily choices. The man who had once destroyed others to feel powerful had finally learned to build something worthy of respect, a life dedicated to helping others discover their own authentic strength. If you like the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.